at intrinsically evil, less, not good. Because that in turn denies the incarnation. Okay. Now, this way of looking, the way this manifests itself throughout time, is in different heresies, different worldviews. Basically, everything comes down to you see things sacramentally, which is another word for Catholic or human, or you see things non-sacramentally. No, you see them as not connected with God, or you see them connected with God. Now, some of these ways of thinking, the less or non-sacramental ways, can even bleed their way into our Catholic ethos, and we don't recognize, or we take for what is Catholic and become very dogmatic about it, what really is not Catholic, and that is especially true in the area of human sexuality. So this is all a big build-up to like the word prudery, prudish. Prudish would be like where we are basically, in a sense, you're basically suspect of human sexuality and things thereof. And to even talk about it, or to dare to do what really a Theology does, and what people like Christopher or we do here, to dare to connect it with things that are holy, is for many people, especially many well-meaning people who truly believe they are very, very Catholic, to them that is, yes, very, very palatable, very inconceivable, even wrong, bad, evil, to the point where they want to stop it and stop the people who are doing it, like Christopher. And the people who are doing this to Christopher are people who are like, who would see themselves as very holy, very learned, and
they think they're very pious.
Yeah, exactly. Being very pious, you know. And I'm in this regard, I'm not saying that judging them as like they are good people. They are good, in every way, and they're good intentions. Yeah.
In the fullness of.
Right. They just don't. They've been influenced by the Manichaean demon, as we say it, and that has led its way deep into our whole, what we consider to be Catholic morality. In other words, when we cover the body, we don't do so because the body is bad or sex is dirty. It's actually the opposite. We cover it because it is so holy. But even how we cover it, and whether we cover it, what's appropriate, all the context. There is no, for the prudes, the body is basically, if you take their thinking, all the women would have to wear burqas. They would never admit to that. Oh no, but that's, if you take their thinking, you would have to come to that conclusion, and that a married couple in bed should somehow make children and not even be naked, or certainly not even see each other that way. So I mean, this just goes on. You can take it to extremes. So that's where a lot of people are coming from, in the name of being pure of heart and modesty and all that. So that's the prudish Manichaean demon, which manifests itself in it. But that's sort of the basis of it. That the created order is lesser, or somehow wrong, debased, intrinsically. Yes, it has fallen. There has been the concupiscence has come in and marred it and harmed it, but it still intrinsically is not bad. In fact, it's the opposite. And see, that's what John Paul's whole thing, that's what he was trying to do, to get us to see correctly, see like a Catholic. Because if you don't, what happens is you swing between poles. You either are prudish or licentious. In other words, it's the sexual revolution and anything goes, free sex and everything, no morality, or it's the opposite. That's right. And we have to be very careful, and this is my great warning to those who are prudish or so-called conservative. You are going to be responsible for producing another sexual revolution if you persist in this perspective. Because if you are at one pole, it necessarily will produce the opposite. And both poles are wrong. They're equally wrong because they have in common the wrong view of
And there's no
human sexuality. So not, yeah, there's no balance, yeah.
there's no meaning in it. So the created order is made to look like it was in order. It was
Right. It was like
yes.
as if it was created bad to the beginning.
It was disordered.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, exactly.
They're trying to make the order of God's creation a disorder, which it's not. It's the opposite. It's the order. God's creation is the order.
Precisely. It is. That's the norm. And what John, in the Theology of the Body, he talks about original man and then historical man, and
Oh, we just use emails, yeah.
Just in case you need somebody doing this,
Right? She's helping.
You were more than what they asked for. I was always told.
It was an excellent article. I will send it to everybody on the TOB list. Or tell me if I already did, those who were on the list, but it was a Protestant who said, the Protestants are also very hung up on this sexuality stuff because all the men's groups, all they do is talk about porn, which is a big problem, but like he said, and no one's talking about the right way to do
Right.
and stuff. So anyway, it's just the most insightful article I've ever read, and he's not, I think he mentioned TOB, but like he stumbled across it or something, but he says it wasn't until he started to date a person, a real life woman, that he realized and figured out what love really is, and again, being guided by the Bible and his faith and all this stuff. But it was like that, the incarnation, that's where he saw, you don't have to be afraid, you don't have to be scared, and if you love this person, you're not going to do anything to hurt them or compromise them or yourself. And he realized it's, it's a joyful thing.
Right.
It's not meant to make you all in knots
Right,
and stuff.
exactly, right.
But it's a very short article. I'll send it to you. It's like, yes, he got it.
Yes. And see, that's the threshold, I call it the threshold, that we have to cross to truly have a real purity of heart, to really live as God wants us to live. This is called, and you'll hear this a lot with Christopher and in the Theology of the Body, life according to the Spirit. The life in the Spirit, with a capital S. It's not just believing or feeling that you're righteous because you play by the rules, you observe the rules, and you stay pure and clean. But you don't really live. Rather, it's really living, but doing so in the Spirit. Another way of this is, and this is the big battle that many have. This is where the big battle is like with what Christopher is trying to do in articulating the Theology of the Body, what we believe the Theology of the Body is trying to do, and those who don't quite understand it, it could be summed up in this way. A man's, in the area of lust, a man's responsibility is not just to look away, but rather it is to choose not to lust while he looks, or sees rather. But he sees with the second eye.
As everybody accuses you and Christopher of, is that it's okay to look at porn. as long as
Oh,
you know,
absolutely,
got
right.
everything together. It's
Right.
like, no, that's not what you're saying.
No, not at all. Never. And I go on record. I always say in my talks that absolutely never look at porn, period. But aside from porn, remember, we are immersed in a pornified culture. So soft porn is all around us. So we have to learn somehow. It's just like it's like building up an immunity in a sense by being exposed to something. You have to learn how to your body. That's how your body. Your body becomes strong and healthy by going up against diseases. Okay. So it's the same thing. We have to learn how to see. We have no choice because it's all around us. No, we never would say look at porn ever. And furthermore, as I always say in my talks, and so this is what happens when people, they misquote you, they don't hear it right, they pick and choose. I always make a strong point, saying never look at porn, and the wisdom of looking away is in fact part of I call it the arsenal. That's indeed part of our arsenal for purity of heart. But it's not enough. It does not bring us to a true purity of heart, which all has to do with the interior, the interior gaze. Remember, it's what's inside a man, not what's outside of him, as Christ says, that makes him pure or impure. How are you seeing from the inside out? The theology of the body is drawing us, trying to help us retrieve the right ethos. In other words, interview how you see from the outside out. Not what's out there, what are you up against, but how do you from here out see it. So this is where and again, this is where you can't, when Christopher gets criticized or myself on this or wherever, and people are looking at it again dualistically. They're looking at it as either or, black and white. Well, if you say this, then you're saying that. No. Listen entirely to what we're saying. Read the theology of the body entirely. Because, we're going to see. We'll start officially now. I guess I'll start with a prayer. I'll explain it later. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. O heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of truth, you're everywhere present, fill all things. Treasure, blessings, and giver of life, come and dwell within us. Cleanse us of all stain and save our souls, O gracious Lord. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, welcome to everybody. We're running just a little pre-chat before the class officially starts. But we're going to see this, what I'm talking about, we're going to see some things that will just absolutely amaze and, in a sense, scandalize you, unless you understand it, from this very book. And what's going to happen with this book? I know we've been kind of moving through a lot of concepts and sort of philosophical, seems kind of abstract. Like last time was about, the chapter was about the metaphysics of love. Love as this, love as that. It's like words, philosophical terms to get to what really it is. Now this whole book, you got to stay with it because he ratchets it up and up and up until he's going to take us to the stratosphere. He's going to take us to places that people never thought he could go as a celibate priest or bishop. Many people, it has been said, that they say, well, he must have been married, or he secretly, or he maybe, or they go so far as to say he must have had, experience with girlfriends or something, because how could he possibly know what he knows? There's no way, unless he was married and experienced it. Well, that brings us to the precise proof of the fact that the spousal mystery, our sexuality, is in fact our sharing in God. So, the more a person of God you are, as he was, the more you will know about sexuality, the human experience. It's not people who experience it that know everything. It's those who are closest to God who know what the experience really is. Because the experiences that we have the real why behind them is in the mystical, is in God. There is a mystical sacramental foundation behind all of our human experience, especially sexuality. So, who knows more? The one that knows about or experiences techniques, the way they put two bodies together in different ways and come up with a titillation, or the person that knows the why behind those titillations, or where they come from, what their source is, what they really are. Which one knows more? It's going to be the one who knows the why, meaning the mystical, theological, sacramental foundation. And that's the person that's going to be able to say the most beautiful and profound and very, very concrete, relevant things about that human experience, as we will see in this book. So we're going to start to ratchet up a little bit more today now. We're going to get into a little bit more again about what happens when what is love? What happens when we feel this attraction, the titillation? What's actually going on? He kind of gets into our brain, and he's kind of going into this, what's actually happening in there, and what is that? What is the significance of that? And this is very helpful, good for those, especially preparing for marriage. When you've been attracted to someone, you're in a relationship or considering it. In fact, that's why he did this whole thing. Remember, this was done for young people. This was done as he always did in his, as he's canoeing down the river, talking about sex with young people as a priest. He's answering really the questions of young people, but doing it as he is so good at doing. Taking one word and going on forever through it. What the meaning of that really, really is. And that's the key to our new evangelization and to our strength and empowerment as Christians, and especially as Catholics. We can answer, and if you want to use the term, win all arguments, all defenses of our faith and church teaching when we do one thing. You make it all about the words, not about the argument. Make it about the words.
It just reminded me that I just saw Easy A. I watch all the movies, and what a disaster. Oh, just... And they put everything out there, and they're missing everything. It's like, the more explicit they are, the more the more obscure real love, real sex is. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Just...
the other good thing about for the audience, we may be tempted to interweave, but that's good because there's some good ones out there that are worthy of being brought in. The other good thing about this movie, The Right, is that I was happy about, is that it didn't end up in the usual Hollywood thing, boy meets girl, and he leaves and goes off with her, and it did everything to lead you to make you think that was going to happen, the usual Hollywood script, but it didn't, which is another good thing. So. Okay, on page 101, psychological analysis of love. Gosh, is that necessary? Doesn't it take all the fun out of it? No, this is actually how you get the fun back into it. It's sense, impression, and emotion. I kind of put the sequence here. He's going to talk about sense. We sense them. We come into something. We get stimuli. Boy sees girl. What happens from there? Let's analyze that. The reason why we have to is because boy, and usually girl with him, do not analyze it enough. And then they go in to make major commitments based on this unanalyzed experience, only to become unhappy and wonder why. What happened? Well, but if they do this, you'll be able to make better choices and understand what's really happening to you. Okay, sense is part of cognition. In other words, of we see something, we think about it, as we're engaging our senses. Awareness, we have an awareness of something. And then there's an impression, it leaves an impression, and then there's usually an emotional response. That emotional response is based upon a value.
In other words, we're perceiving a value. So it's kind of like in stages here. All right, so at the bottom of 101, sense impressions are very closely connected with that specific property and power of the senses, which is called cognition. Cognition means like knowing, the mind. The senses react to the objects relevant to them with the help of impressions. The object is reflected or mirrored. The senses seize and retain its image. An impression presupposes immediate contact between one of the senses and a given object. The length of its existence is also, properly speaking, the duration of the immediate experience. But although the immediate experience ends, the senses continue to retain the image of the object. Only sensual impressions gradually superseded by imagination. In connection with this, we also speak of interior senses. Our external senses are those which establish immediate contact with the object while it is present to them. Our interior senses maintain that contact when the object is no longer within the immediate range of the external senses. Okay, that's, put it simply, you meet somebody, you go home, whatever, and you've got this sense of them. Remember, you're thinking about them. Oh, I think I'm falling in love. I think I'm attracted to this person. I'll see them again. Okay, so you retain an impression. Now, in the next paragraph, partway down on page 102. We're on 102. Second paragraph, halfway down. We know, however, that we can subject a material object to closer observation, and that if we do, these other characteristics will make themselves evident and establish themselves as part of the knowledge obtained through senses. So the next one, then, we're going to look at is emotions. Down at the bottom of that page, 102. Emotions are separate and distinct from sense impressions. An emotion is also a sensory reaction to some object, but the content of the reaction differs from the content of an impression. And the content of an impression, which is reflected, what is reflected is the image of an object. Whereas in an emotion, we're reacting to a value which we find in that object. So we must take into account the fact that the different objects which we encounter in our immediate sensory experience impinge on our attention not only as having content but as having value. A sense impression is a reaction to content, emotion, reaction to value. Okay, got that? All right, now we'll go down further on page 103, in that first paragraph, about halfway down. When its object is a material value, the emotion is shallower, more superficial. When, however, the object of an emotion is a supramaterial or spiritual value, it reaches more deeply into a man's psyche. Okay, the last sentence on the bottom of that page, 103. If human love begins with an impression, if everything in it, even its spiritual content, depends upon that impression, this is because the impression is accompanied by an emotion, which makes it possible to experience another person as a value. Or putting it differently, enables two persons, a woman and a man, each to experience the other as a value. For this reason, we must, in our further psychological analysis of love, constantly refer to values. So, as we'll see, when
values doesn't mean like we're used to thinking of values as kindness, or
right,
like a virtue more.
Right.
What would be
these are values of means that something is good, something has a quality that is attractive, that is kind of good in its own right. It is valuable in a sense. It elicits in you a certain sort of reverence, respect, or it determines your approach to it. This is helpful whenever, in relationships, like a man is, say, attracted to a woman, but he's also attracted to her value, the value of femininity that is in this person. So it's like I'm not just, am I attracted to this person as a person? Or is my attraction more to the value of femininity that she exhibits or incarnates as a woman? Now, the reason why that's important, because it helps in our approach. It can sometimes be idealizing. I once saw a play, Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet, and there was a person who gave a little analysis, a little introduction of it before the play began. And one of the points that this expert made was that Romeo was not just so much in love with Juliet, but he was in love with the idea of being in love. See, in other words, the value of love is what he was in love with, not just her as a person. Because that value is incarnated in the person and in their particular gender, male and female. All right, so now sensuality, page 104. Immediate contact between a woman and a man is always the occasion of a sensory experience for both of them. Each of them is a body, is therefore exposed to the senses of the other and creates some impression. This impression is frequently accompanied by emotion. This is because by nature the woman represents for the man for the woman, a certain value. This value easily attaches itself to an impression received by the senses and having as its source a person of the opposite sex. That's basically what I was saying. Okay, to explain that more, we'll go to the next page, 105. The first paragraph, next halfway down. He's talking about man and woman. Each of these persons makes an impression on the other thanks to the values experienced together with intellectual cognizance of a person of the other sex. The values are the object of emotion. It is in fact they which coalesce with the impression and account for its vividness to the subject receiving it. So the value and the emotion, in other words, the emotion is a reaction to the value, the perceived value. And that's what makes it very powerful. That's the so-called falling in love. The power, the blindness of falling in love.
The opposite of that is really quite frightening. The opposite of that is meeting a man who's educated, lawyer, interesting, can talk to, very interested, everything. Total, no feeling of sexuality. I mean, that is frightening. We're talking about how you can be so sexually attracted. On the other hand, you get a really nice man, totally no sexual attraction. In fact, quite the opposite, repulsive. Now, let me ask you this.
You mean the person?
Something, Father?
You
You marry somebody like that, where are you going to be? You know what I mean?
You mean okay? He's not.
Sorry. We need to repeat.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
She's saying that the opposite of that. She's bringing up what about the concern about the opposite of that? That someone is not having a sensual, emotional reaction to the value of what? The woman? No, you're talking about the man?
The woman to the man. Or it could be the opposite too, but I mean the woman to the man I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I understand finding someone that you are very sexually attracted to, but just find someone that you're not, and you begin to value that sexual attraction, that isn't supposed to determine your relationship as we're talking about, but boy, without it, it's frightening. Wow.
Yeah, it is. And sometimes we think we shouldn't have that. Going back to our prude friends, I know it's kind of a tough term, but it applies. We sometimes
have to do with impression, like you say. Even not having sexual attraction has to do with impression.
Yeah.
Your senses.
And sometimes we think we can't allow ourselves to have this either. Like it will come to the point where he'll talk about. I think we have touched on already that.
Yeah, but if you can allow it with someone who you are sexually attracted to, then you find someone that you're not sexually attracted. Then you know that it's possible to be sexually attracted. It's just that some relationships there is nothing there in that area, even though there's everything else. Now, that's what's interesting.
No, that's called being celibate, right, sister?
Right.
We have platonic relationships with everybody.
But you don't have any feeling for it, right?
Well,
That's
are
not a
you
good
talking
reason for
about
being
like,
celibate.
Are you talking about like you're looking for a marriage partner, but you don't feel any attraction to
Yeah,
that
very
person?
good, sister.
And so-
Exactly.
So you probably
A man you
shouldn't
could marry.
marry that person.
Yeah, you shouldn't marry.
Yeah.
But a man that has all the qualities that you would like to get married, but
Oh,
there's
yeah.
no physical
Right.
attraction.
Can you repeat?
Yeah, okay, she's saying that, like, for instance, you meet somebody who has all these great qualities, but you
Yeah.
just don't have that emotional reaction.
Yeah, you think a marriage
Yeah.
can last in something like that?
That's a big question.
I would
It's a
say
good
no.
question.
only if it's mutual.
It probably shouldn't start off with that, but at the same time, it can be acquired.
I mean, what a
Yeah.
great friend, you know?
Yeah, and then in time, perhaps the
A
sensual.
great friend you can't kiss. That's too bad.
A great friend you can't kiss, she said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I got arranged marriages.
Yeah, I was going to say
Yeah.
arranged marriages.
Start that way.
Yeah, they start that way, but they can become then. This,
Fiddler on the
yeah.
Roof. Do you
Or not
love
become.
Yeah, do you love me?
They
Yeah.
can become or not become.
They can become.
Or
Yeah.
not become.
They can also not become. Yes, that's
Yeah,
right.
You have to accept it.
Yeah, that's sort of the downside of the arranged marriages.
Yeah,
You
well,
know.
you may accept it, maybe he won't. So.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry to go off on a tangent, but that just crossed my mind.
All right. Okay, on page 105, the second paragraph, partway down, the sensuality always implies experiencing a particular value bound up with the sensory awareness. Specifically, we are concerned with the sexual value, connected above all with the body of a person of the other sex. We ignore for the moment those perversions in the context of which a sexual value may be connected with a person of the same sex, or not with a person at all, but with an animal, or in other words, he's saying don't bring in the exceptions, right? Okay, in such cases, the ordinary short way of putting it is, why affects my senses? This effect upon someone's senses is only incidentally connected with the awareness of the beauty of the body, with aesthetic appreciation. Another consideration is of real importance to sensuality, namely, that when it only stirs sensuality, a body is commonly experienced as a potential object of enjoyment. Sensuality in itself has a consumer orientation. It is directed primarily and immediately towards a body. It touches the person only indirectly and tends to avoid direct contact. Even with bodily beauty, it has, as we have already said, only an indirect connection, for beauty is essentially an object of contemplative cognition, and to experience aesthetic values is not to exploit it. It gives joy. Enjoyment is defined by St. Augustine in the word frui. Thus, sensuality really interferes with apprehension of the beautiful, even of bodily sensual beauty.
Yeah,
For-
speaking
for-
of body sensual beauty, Father, if you look at a Playboy magazine and you see a beautiful woman,
Mhm.
and if you look at it from a spiritual point of view, you can see how God created woman. I
Mhm.
mean, He gave her so much power, gave her so much beauty, gave her so much, and then you relate that to the Blessed Virgin, and you see how out of context it is in that Playboy magazine.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes,
It's
context.
out of context.
Right. Exactly. The context is everything. It's a very
Yeah, but
important
you can
word.
see the beauty with which God created that woman,
Mhm.
so that people are buying these magazines and enjoying the beauty of that woman's body that God created. In fact,
Oh, come on. They buy it for the articles.
Huh?
Talking about Playboy magazine. They buy it for the articles.
Yeah, He gave her a lot of power in her marriage if she's chaste.
Like,
she's
people go
a
to,
kind woman. He's given her a lot of power.
guys go to Hooters restaurants because they have good chicken wings. Yeah. Okay. Okay, this orientation of sensuality on page 106 at the top. This orientation of sensuality is a matter of spontaneous reflexes. In this form, it is not primarily an evil thing, but a natural thing. Ooh. Starting to ratchet up here.
Say it again, Father. Say it
Okay. The orientation of sensuality is a matter of spontaneous reflexes. In this form, it is not primarily an evil thing, but a natural thing. See, now they explain a little bit more down the second paragraph on this page, 106. Sensuality itself is on no account to be identified with the sexual vitality of a man's or woman's body, for this has a purely unconscious and infrasensual physiological character. This is why we come across manifestations of sensuality with a sexual coloring in children who are physically not yet sexually mature. Although sensuality is not to be confused with the sexual vitality of the human body as such, the first must be taken in conjunction with the second, with the sexual life process as a whole. The sexual urge expresses itself in these life processes in such a way that the organism possessing male properties requires an organism possessing female characteristics, in conjunction with which it can attain its proper end. That end in which the sexual vitality of the body finds its natural consummation. Okay. Sensuality is not in itself bad, is what he's saying here. And this is very important, especially, again, for the guys. To respond, to have a response that is sensual is a spontaneous thing. You see something by nature, you find it, you're programmed to find it attractive. So that we call that a sensual. There's a sensual response to that. It doesn't mean that it's bad in and of itself. It's, of course, what we do with it from there that becomes the wrong or the rightness of something. So, because I know a lot of, this is where we get into like not really understanding real Catholic morality in these things. A lot of guys think, and perhaps women too, but it's more of a, perhaps a little more of a guy, I think, is a visual thing, that because they feel a central reaction to seeing a woman, that is wrong. That's bad. They've lusted. No, that's not. The lust part, see, lust involves a choice. This is not a choice. This is a natural reaction. The lust part is the choice that comes after. And this, I think, is very important. You know why? Because it can help spare men particularly from a sense of despair or hopelessness. See, a lot of men today would not have any use for all this stuff because they figure, what you talking about? And many of them will say this. We'll get into big discussions with this, that no, it is impossible for me to ever look at a woman without lusting. Now they're sentencing themselves to a kind of a despair, a hopelessness. What they need to understand is that what, in many cases, they are calling lust, and therefore figuring they're basically doomed, is in fact a natural, sensual, spontaneous reaction. And so it is not wrong. And there is hope for you. There's hope out there, man. So crack open your John Paul II books. Yes.
I would say that it's you can summarize that in what so many psychologists work on initially is be comfortable with those feelings, and that those feelings, that emotion, that initial emotion, is not wrong. So many people have an emotion about their emotion.
Right.
My emotion of being angry or frustrated or sensual is labeled as bad. That emotion is bad. But
right.
If you can just recognize it as your impression, that it went through your sense, your cognition,
right,
and you've had an emotion,
right,
but then you don't label it as good or bad as
right.
it is, then it leaves off that guilt, that shame,
right,
that you jump towards after labeling it as bad.
Excellent. You come up here and help me teach this class. Get another microphone.
Okay,
Perfect. Okay. He said it perfectly. He said, you got it. It's exactly the point. That when he's saying, like we've been saying, when this helps to take away that sense of shame and guilt that many people will feel, men and women, particularly men, when they find themselves having a sensual emotional reaction to what they're seeing, what they're experiencing. Like, for instance, a woman. Let's say a married man does. He's talking, he meets a woman in the office, whatever, church, whatever. He finds that he's having a sensual reaction to her. That is spontaneous. That is not wrong. Because he didn't choose it. He said, there's a woman there. I'm going to have a sensual reaction. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Sensual, sensual, sensual. Sin, sin, sin. No, that's not what men do. It's a data. It's like data input. Like your computer. The data comes into him. There is then a reaction. Now that reaction can be spontaneously sensual. That is not wrong, and there's no reason to feel shame or guilt. In fact, in one sense, there's reason to celebrate. And in fact, this is the reason this is what I say when I talk about these things. I say this is the moment you bring in prayer. This is where you glorify God for having made such beautiful, mysterious thing that is in which you are reacting sensually. There must be something beautiful there, something of value that you're perceiving, even deep in your subconscious and all that. Whatever. Praise God for it. Now, up to that point, everything's fine. In fact, it's even prayerful. It's even holy. Now, after that, that's where the lust comes in, or does not come in. And that's where then you would have the shame, the guilt, or whatever, or you would simply be moved to another level of holiness that you can actually, I call it see, pray, and pass on. See, pray, and pass on.
Dr. Ray says it's like you can admire what Green Bay did this year, but if you're a Bears fan, you're never going to become a Green Bay Packers fan.
Right, exactly. There you go. See, there's a point where you have to make a choice. Now, in sensual reaction, this choice is very, of course, instantaneous. I mean, it's very quick, of course. You're not like thinking about it. Well, should I lust after her or not? But it is still a choice. It's that little threshold that you cross. That you feel yourself, okay, I've experienced, I've reacted, this is beautiful, I feel a little titillated or whatever, praise God. Now I've got to move on and just keep it at that. This person is attractive to me for whatever reason, it's good, and I keep it that way. So that's where the will comes in. That's the important part.
I've got a lot of disappointments from that kind of thing. See, pray, and pass on. That's terrible.
The emphasis on passing on, huh? All right. Okay. Okay, on page 107. Have it on the page. Sensuality is connected with the stirrings of the body, especially in its so-called erogenous zones. Ooh, see? So this shows its close connection with the inner sexual vitality of the organism itself. For a body possessing male characteristics needs a body possessing female characteristics for the objective ends served by the sexual urge. See, in other words, it's like an antenna, Oh, look, there's the object of there's the completion of my particular gender. It's completed in her, or she in him. That's another reason for the attraction. The ordering of your gender seeks, like an antenna, it's seeking its conclusion, its perfection, its destiny, and that is in the other gender. So when you see it, you're going to have arousal, whether just emotional or even if it gets physical. And later on he'll talk about that still not being wrong in itself. Now, bottom page of the page. However, a human person, as we know, cannot be an object for use. Now, the body is an integral part of the person and so must not be treated as though it were detached from the whole person. Both the value of the body and the sexual value which finds expression in the body depend upon the value of the person. Given then interdependence, a central reaction in which the body and sex are a possible object for use threatens to devalue the person. To react in this way to the body of a person means to see using that body as a possibility. It is therefore easy to understand the reaction of conscience to the stirrings of sensuality. That's exactly what I was saying. Okay, first is the impression, then the conscience has to kick in. Our highly developed Catholic consciences, right?
Father Father, somebody made the point that the term gender,
Mm-hmm.
and I know Dale O'Leary, she's this really awesome
Yeah.
lady who does all kinds of research on pro-life and theology of the body and everything. And she says we shouldn't use the word, we should only use the word gender grammatically. Or we should say sex, meaning male or female.
Interesting.
Yeah, she
yeah.
has this whole, because then gender becomes something malleable and
Mhm.
anyway. So somebody here was asking, they said that they heard we should use the word sex when we mean male or female rather than gender, because gender is so misunderstood today and
Okay.
politicized. And
It's interesting. I say the opposite,
oh, really?
but we're probably arriving at the same
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
The reason I say opposite, I say that try not to use the word sex, use gender, because for me, gender connects us with gender is bringing us into the world that is much more comprehensive and mystical. In other words, gender is a revelation of God. You know, He reveals through gender. That she's saying that gender is malleable today. That's true. For me,
This is Shayna. Shayna's saying that everyone thinks that gender is not the same as your sex. You've got
Yeah.
Your body is a sex.
that's right.
And
Yeah.
then you do whatever you want with your gender.
Yeah, that's right. That's what
You
the
know?
problem is. Yeah.
It's the detachment of
yeah.
the body. So.
See, we're again words. We're misusing and misunderstanding both words, gender and sex. So interesting that
Yeah.
Larry and I say the opposite
Yeah,
thing.
I
is that-
see what you're saying.
yeah.
Same thing.
But I think the commonality here is that understand what these words really mean. See, she's saying, this O'Leary is saying, to truly understand what was meant by sex. And I, of course, am saying truly understand what is meant by gender. To mean gender is the mystical, comprehensive. In other words, the part that connects us with
It
God.
should be like
Yeah.
everything else. Right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
everything that
Everything.
comprises your
Yes,
body, your mind,
exactly,
your soul.
yeah. Yes.
That's one abused word.
Yeah, it sure is. Okay, let's see. Okay, on top of 108, let us add that in man there can be no such things as pure sensuality, such as exists in animals, nor the infallible regulation of sensual reactions by instinct. What then is completely natural in animals becomes subnatural in man. The content of a sensual reaction in which the body and sex are experienced as objects of enjoyment itself indicates that sensuality in man is not pure, but modified in one way or another by awareness of values. Pure, natural sensuality, governed in its reactions by instinct, is not oriented towards enjoyment divorced from the end of sexual life, whereas sensuality in man is so oriented. This further means that sensuality by itself is not love, and may very easily become its opposite. At the same time, we must recognize that when man and woman come together, sensuality, as a natural reaction to a person of the other sex, is sort of raw material for true conjugal love. By itself, however, it most certainly does not play that role. The yearning for sexual value connected with the body as an object of use demands integration. There's one of my favorite words. It must become an integral part of a fully formed and matured attitude to the person, or else it is certainly not love. A current of love as desire does, it is true, run through sensuality, but is not supplemented by those other noble elements of love which we spoke of in part 1 of this chapter. If it remains desire nothing more, then it is quite certainly not love. Sensuality must be then open to the other, nobler elements of love. Now, this is something that I do when I like working with married couples, preparing them for marriage. See, the pre-Cana program at my parish is me. You sit down in front of me, and we go through this. No, because I ask them, they don't know why I'm asking it, but I say, so tell me, how did you two meet, and what made you decide to get married? What I'm looking for is, what level is this relationship bonding on or being based on. At what level of maturity, relational maturity, are they making or intending to make a very mature commitment, or a commitment that requires maturity? I've known, even going back to what you're saying about how things can change, I even know a very good, devout couple, older already, who told me at the beginning when they met and got married, they said, a lot of our relationship at first was based on physical attraction, on the sensuality, and many relationships are. Many couples, I find, will come to me and say, they'll admit, because they have the insight now, years later, when they see the problems, and they'll say, Father, I have to admit, our relationship basically was based on lust, lusting after each other, or sensual attraction. And naturally that can be very, bonding. It can be very exciting. And of course, then they're being sexually active, which just makes it even more. So because what I try to explain to the couples is, you have to, this is why I tell them, when they're living together or having relations before marriage, is don't do that, because it's going to fool you. You're going to be making commitment that's based upon something on the sensual level, which by its nature is attractive. It's going to want to bring you together. You're going to want more of this. But you have to realize marriage is about making commitment to you two as persons. And the sensual is part of it, like he's saying. It must be it's part of it. But it can't be just the predominant thing. And that's what happens in many, many cases. And you can see it's easy for that to happen. There's a lot of electricity when they're young, and there's a lot between them. And especially they go right into the physical intimacy, and they have this, in a sense, it's a delusional bonding that's happening. And then they go and make a life commitment on that. Then, during that process, they start to themselves as persons start to emerge, and they have to deal with each other as persons. Oh, that becomes a problem then. A couple was talking to me, they had tremendous problems, and I said, well, how did you meet? Well, Father, we met in a bar. We were bonded basically because we enjoyed drinking together, and then from that, of course, into bed. And when we seem to enjoy those things, those are the things we enjoy together, drinking and going to bed. So we decided, we like this so much, let's do it the rest of our lives. That's called marriage, right? That way we can make sure that we'll be drinking, going to bed with each other the rest of our lives. And that's how they entered marriage. I think I'm going to try to push for a legal mandate that all bars must have this book on hand at that time. After your second drink, you're required to read a paragraph.
Yeah. Theology, the Bible.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if you had hairdressers and barbers, and these people are trying to talk to people, all
Yeah.
TOB trained? That would be awesome.
Yeah, it would. That's a little bit was behind the theology on tap stuff, Okay, so this is a very important point, really. And really, you could see where it's not easy when you have the sensual attraction and you're bonded and you're having the physical expressions, all that. I think this is what's meant by love is blind, which is not true. Love is not blind. Love sees clearly. If it's really love, it's what we call love that is blind. All right, well, let's go to 109, the top there. The reaction symptomatic of sensuality may occur incidentally even when the body of the other person is not regarded as an object of enjoyment. They may, for instance, manifest themselves when the body is the object of some scientific investigation or study, or an object of artistic interest. Sensuality often insinuates itself into such situations uninvited, so to speak. Sometimes it endeavors to draw the whole attitude to the body and to the person into its own orbit. and at other times it only sets up a typical reflex in the mind. It shows that the existing attitude of the body in the person might be drawn into the orbit of sensuality, which lurks, as it were, just beyond the threshold. See, he says might be. He's talking about like doctors, artists, like myself, like being in art all my life and going to art school, and we paint and draw nude models and all that. To me, it's the greatest training ground for theology of the body. But at the same time, as he says here, there is a risk, that sensuality can intrude uninvited. But I'm glad he said, and he put it in little quotes there, might be drawn in the orbit. See, it doesn't automatically mean you are. Which again, another thing for we're picking on our prudish friends here today, but that if you see the naked body, you will lust. And you can't fool me. There's no other way you can do that. No. You might be drawn into that. It doesn't necessarily mean you will. In fact, one of the best safeguards to not lusting is an experience like that. Believe it or not, I know because I experienced it. This thing that just would seem impossible for a lot of people, a lot of well-meaning people. How could you possibly ever look at the naked human body and not lust? Well, let me tell you something. What causes lust, more so, is not the body itself. As I know from experience, vast experience, but which he says over and over again in this book and in Theology of the Body, it's in how it's presented and how it's received, which means that the naked human body can be more modest and more pure than the body presented with certain kinds of clothes. You get it?
Yeah, sometimes clothing can be seductive.
Exactly.
What I was thinking about, again, the naked body, and not involving sexuality, like a little child. And when I was with my brother's child, the mother pulled off her little diaper, and she was running around in all kinds of positions, getting up on the couch, and you can't help but look and look and look. The body does kind of, even an innocent little body will draw your eyes and mind to it, even though you're trying to remain innocent with it. And my aunt sometimes walks around naked, and I said, Aunt, why don't you put some clothes on? Because that's a reaction, wow. And so it does. Just
Yeah.
do that, even when it's not a sexual situation. It is.
I get a big... Yeah, she's saying that, like he's saying here, you can have children, you can have a sensual reaction even to children. Just the body itself has that, it just has, at any age, has that.
I told my sister-in-law, put some clothes on her.
I love it when the kids, little boys, especially kids, when they're toddlers, they just learn how to walk and run. Whenever I've seen it once in a while, the parents. I had younger brothers too. Whenever they can escape, man, they just love to run naked. And it's just absolute ecstasy. Get that diaper off me, I'm free. Parents, come back. Especially like when you're in public at church or somewhere, you're changing your diaper. There goes, oh my goodness! Everybody's all excited, and the kids just laugh.
He really knew the routine. When he wet his diaper, he'd pull his diaper off, lay on his back, put his legs up, so you could clean him and put his diaper on. He had the routine down.
See, like the Lord said, you must be like little children to enter the kingdom of God. They're so innocent about that. They don't, it's and trusting too. Okay, 109 at the second paragraph at the top. All this, however, most certainly does not go to show that sensual excitability as a natural and congenital characteristic of a concrete person is in itself morally wrong. An exuberant and readily roused sensuality is the stuff from which a rich, if difficult, personal life may be made. You see that? He's actually saying it's okay to have a robust sensuality. Golly, what was he? Some kind of a liberal? This guy became Pope? Yeah. It may help the individual to respond more readily and completely to the decisive elements in personal love. Primitive sensual excitability, provided it's not of a morbid origin, can become a factor making for a fuller and more ardent love. Such a love will always be the result of sublimation.
Father, what is sublimation?
Sublimation means to put it at the service of something. Like the sensuality is good, he's saying. You should have a robust sensuality, strong libido and all that. But it's put at the service of what is of value. In other words, he's saying you should have the potential to be a great lover. You should have all that sensuality and attraction, but it's directed and put at the service. It's sublimated. In other words, it's controlled. It's like how your car works. Your car is actually a controlled bomb. It's how it works. It's a controlled explosion. It's this fantastic energy that is simply controlled and sublimated to the right use of the car. If it wasn't, it would just be a bomb. So the energy is not bad in itself. It's good, but it has to be sublimated. In other words, directed to its purpose, to an order.
Well, it's a good idea to have a robust sensuality in common, because there are married couples who
Yes.
are robust, one isn't.
Yes, yeah, that's often a big problem, and I get that a lot too. He's interested, she's not, especially after a certain age.
Remember here, she's interested and he's not, brother?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yeah.
What page is that?
And that's when I take the book to the guy and smack him on the head. What's the matter with you? No, it's okay. Idiot. Page 109.
What are you, nuts or something?
Yeah, that's marriage counseling. Girl, do you know how many men like to be in your position? What's the matter with you? Anyway, you see, which goes to show that people ask me, what is the theology of the body? My official answer is, it's a hoot. When you really get into it, it's a hoot. It's a lot of fun. Because being human is a lot of fun. God is fun. Life is fun. We just have to allow ourselves to have that. But it's just like Chesterton says. The church may have walls and rules and laws, as it were, that people despise, but they're walls of a playground. He says that the church has priests and bishops and canon law and things that seem to restrict us, but only so that other good things can run wild, which is another definition for the sublimation, He said in his book, he said, like, what if children were playing on a playground and they had no walls, and they were by a cliff or something? They would play and fall over. They would not be free to play. They are free to play and imagine because they have the walls. See, it's the right attitude. The playing isn't wrong. It's like the sexuality isn't wrong. And yes, it needs the proper boundaries, the proper approach, the discipline, the asceticism, the purity, so that the sensuality can run wild within those boundaries. Okay, sentiment and love. Now we're going to move from sensual now to feeling, basically. The feeling part. Now we have a feeling reaction. Sentimentality must be clearly distinguished from sensuality. It said earlier that a sense impression is usually accompanied by an emotional response. Although the impression is sensory, the emotion may have reference to a non-material value residing in the object of the impression. Direct contact between man and woman always entails an impression which may be accompanied by an emotion. When this emotion has as its object a sexual value residing in the body itself as a possible object of enjoyment, it is a manifestation of sensuality. However, a sexual value which is the object of emotion is by no means necessarily connected with the body itself as a possible object of enjoyment. It may be connected with the whole person of the other sex. In that case, the object of emotional experience for a woman will be the value masculinity, and for a man the value femininity. The first may be connected with, for instance, an impression of strength, the second with an impression of charm. But both are connected with a whole person of the other sex, not only with that person's body. This susceptibility, which is different from sensual excitability, to the sexual value residing in a whole person of their sex, to femininity or masculinity, should be called sentiment. Sentimental susceptibility is the source of affection. It differs from sensuality, not so much in its basis as in its inner content. A couple sentences down. For sensuality, one part of this integral sense impression, the body, immediately stands out from and is, as it were, disassociated from the rest, whereas sentiment remains attached to a whole individual of the other sex. See, sentiment is attached to a whole individual. Sexual value, therefore, continues to reside in the whole person and is not confined only to that person's body. Also, because of this, in sentiment, we do not see that conspicuous drive for enjoyment which is so characteristic of sensuality. Affection is not an urge to consume. It is, therefore, compatible with the contemplative mood which go with a sense of beauty and responsiveness to aesthetic values. In the male, affection is permeated with a strong feeling for admiration of femininity. In the woman, with a similar feeling admiration for masculinity. No desire to use the other is discernible within the limits of such as affection. Affection as such. Affection appears to be free from that concupiscence of which sensuality is full. In such an emotional state, though, a different sort of desire is discernible and a different need makes itself felt. This is the desire for nearness, for proximity, and simultaneously for the exclusivity or intimacy, a longing to be always alone together. On page 111, middle of the paragraph, second paragraph. It is pretty generally recognized that woman is by nature more sentimental than man, and man more sensual. You understand that? In other words, woman experience a relationship is going to be, it doesn't exclude the sensual, obviously, but it leans, its primary character is going to be more in the feeling relational end. For man, the primary character is going to be on the sensual. Primarily. I mean, they both have sentiment and all that. But it's a matter of where the primary thrust is.
You know, I think the reason for that, Father, is what I heard was that man, from God's point of view, man must always be ready to procreate children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and the woman is not always ready. So it was God's way of keeping the human race going.
It's part of it, and also because men are designed to perceive order and beauty in that way, and to perceive things for the purpose of keeping the order. So men by nature are, and also because of that, in conjunction with what you're saying, remember, men's gaze has to be, in a sense, pulled away and towards the woman, because the male gaze is going to be focused on other things as well. You know, the world outside. Think about Adam. When Adam existed, there was no one to be in relationship to, other than God. He was in relationship to the environment. You know, he was there to keep the order of things. So his gaze is going to be more external. That's why you have predominantly men who are world leaders or in politics, in government, and so on. It's not because they're superior or lording over. It's because it's consistent with their nature, their gaze. Okay, those things require a gaze that is, about the external world. It's about global issues and facts. And one time I was having a discussion with a friend of mine, and we were talking about we were really deep into the world issues and economics and facts and figures, and we were just really hot into this, just discussing and solving the problems of the world. And there was his wife was there, and she turned to Catherine, who I was working with, and she says, she goes, "Do you hear this conversation?" this is like guy facts, These are guy facts, Only guys get, where do they get this stuff? She couldn't understand how we were so incredibly focused and at home with the things out there, the issues, the facts, the figures, the problems, the policies, It just is, their gaze doesn't go that far. It's going to be more internal. It's going to be about the kids, the family, the home, the issues. Not exclusively, but more so. So anyway, my point is that I think by nature also God had to make woman so that his gaze would be pulled towards her. Because his gaze would primarily be out there, Now, this form of sensuality is more readily awakened in the man, more readily crystallizes in his consciousness and his attitude. The very structure of the male psyche and personality is such that it is more readily compelled to disclose and objectivize the hidden significance of love for a person of the other sex. See, the male psyche is designed this way. Its tendon work towards this way. This goes with the relatively more active role of the male in such love, and also imposes responsibility on him. Whereas in the woman, sensuality, is as it were covert and concealed by sentimentality. In other words, her experience is a little bit more internal. It has more to do on the relational end of things. For this reason, she is by nature more inclined to go on seeing as a manifestation of affection what a man already clearly realizes to be the effect of sensuality and the desire for enjoyment. There exists then, as we see, a certain psychological divergence between man and woman. See how he's cranking up more and more, getting really into the whole male-female thing and sexuality? The woman appears more passive, although in a different way she is more active. In any case, her role and her responsibility will be different from the role and the responsibility of the male. That's on page 112 at the top. In the page 112, halfway down that first paragraph. Thus, in the eyes of a person, sentimentality committed to another person, Thus, in the eyes of a person sentimentally committed to another person, the value of the beloved object grows enormously, as a rule, out of all proportion to his or her real value. Sentimental love influences imagination and memory, and is influenced by them in turn. This perhaps explains the fact that a variety of values are bestowed upon the object of love which he or she does not necessarily possess in reality. These are ideal values, not real ones. They dwell in the mind of a sentimentally committed person, often after sentimental love has summoned them up from their hiding place in the unconscious into the field of conscious. Sentiment is fruitful within the subject, since it is the subject's wish, desire, dream that these various values should be found in the object of his love. Sentiment calls them all into being and endows that person with them, so as to make the emotional commitment still further. Do you understand what's going on here? This is a classic. I mean, look how deeply he is going into how we actually function. This is stuff most psychiatrists wouldn't know this, or be able to articulate this. Psychologists and all that. That basically, again, going back to the pre-Cana couples. In fact, I just asked a couple recently. The girl, coming from the background she's coming from, why? Okay, what motivated you for marriage? Why do you want to be married? Does not being married sound to you like unthinkable? Would you be devastated? What I was poking around to get at was exactly what I just read. Are you projecting an idealism into your spouse, future spouse, that is influenced by your background? I'm not saying that it was, but I have to look for that. Because if her commitment is being made out of that to a too large degree, then they're going to be on shaky ground going into this. You understand? So you see, sensuality, see what he's doing here? Carol, what he was doing? Sensuality is good, it's not bad. But it has, at the same time, a potential for something bad. To use the person as an object and just be about their bodies. and to blind you, to real love. Sentiment, he says, is good also, but it has its downside, its vulnerability to what? To idealize, to not see the person as they really are, but to want to take your desires for love, your subconscious sense of the value of femininity or masculinity, and project that in the person. And especially nowadays, to do so out of what has been your hurts from the dysfunctional family you came from, or the divorced, broken home you came from. That there are wounds and needs there that are going to have. It's like a certain hunger, and you're going to want so badly to feed that hunger that you have a tendency to project these ideals and lofty values onto that person, when that's really not them.
And you're not going to be satisfied.
Right,
Yeah.
right. They're going to disappoint. And then what happens is, time goes on, this is what happens in a lot of couples, that dissatisfaction that you're talking about starts to get expressed. They start sending that message to each other. You're not who I thought you were, who I wanted you to be. They don't even know it consciously. They're sending these messages that are negative. They're kind of breaking each other down. I keep telling them, repeat after me. As you look at each other before you get married, what you see is what you get.
I imagine.
If he has a drinking problem now, he will have it 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, you should go into it with that idea. Yes, he can change, and with the grace of God, anyone can change. But you must go into it with the idea that what you see, what you get. I asked them, these couples will ask about those things. And sometimes they soft-pedal it. Well, yeah, I like to have a few beers with the boys and all that. And then she is like, well, yeah, but he won't be doing that when we're married. Ooh, red flag. What you see is what you get. Don't project or idealize. Again, tough things to do, especially when we have these needs. So, sensuality, sentiment.
Jesus say that, Father, what you need is need. Jesus said that himself. What you
Yes.
need is need. Whatever we try to get from marriage, what we win in
Yep.
a relationship with God as well in the marriage.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go to wait a minute. Okay, the bottom of 112. Idealization of the object of love is a well-known phenomenon. So I just said, yes. It is particularly characteristic of young love. Now, how would he know that? He's a celibate priest. Should know about these things. Here the ideal is more powerful than the real. Living human being, and the latter often becomes merely the occasion for interruption in the subject's emotional consciousness of the values which he or she longs with all his heart to find in another person. It does not matter whether they are really values possessed by the particular person towards whom the subject feels a sentimental love. For that person, as we have said, is less the object of than the occasion for affection. So you get it? It's just what we're saying, Sentimentality is subjective and feeds sometimes to excess, above all on the values which the subject bears within himself or herself. Going back to Romeo with Juliet. He's projecting his love of love. He wants to love. He's in love with the thought of love. So there's Juliet, who's simply incarnating that. Again, at page 113, second paragraph, second sentence. That form of love shows a characteristic ambivalence. It seeks to be near the beloved person, seeks proximity and expression of tenderness, yet is remote from the beloved in that it does not depend for its life on that person's true value, but on those values to which the subject clings as to its ideal. This is why sentimental love is very often a cause of disillusionment. Disillusion where the woman is concerned may come with the discovery as time goes by that the man's sentiment is only a sort of screen for concupiscence or for the will to use another. Translated, well, he just married me for sex. Then she realizes this. Okay, we'll go down to the bottom, towards the bottom of the page. 113. We do, however, know that by itself, as a form of reciprocal relationship to man and woman, it is sufficient. It too needs to be integrated, as does sensual desire. If love remains just sensuality, just a matter of sex appeal, it will not be love at all, but only the utilization of one person by another or of two persons by each other. While if love remains mere sentiment, it will equally be unlike love in the complete sense of the word, for both persons will remain, in spite of everything, divided from each other. Though it may appear that they are very close just because they so eagerly seek proximity. You get that? We want to be close, therefore we convince ourselves that we are, or we project that in each other. Sentiment itself suffers some subjectivism, so that although objective love can begin to take shape on this ground, to ripen it must draw sustenance from the other sources. Sentiment alone will not mold such a love. Left to itself, it too may prove only a consumer phenomenon. Okay. Now he's going to take to the next level of integrating love. So, just as in the last chapter, we're talking about love as friendship, love as goodwill, love as... These are all legitimate dimensions of love, but none of them is complete in themselves. And that, so he's kind of like on a journey here. He's like stair. We got to get to the next level, to the next level, next level. He has a goal here of what real love really, really is. It contains all these things, and they're good, but none of them are the real thing. Got to keep going, as it were. In other words, don't stop there. Keep going.
So it's not just integration, because you've got to have all the parts there first to
Yeah,
integrate.
yes,
So it's
you do, yeah.
So it's both of them.
Yeah, sensual, sentiment, this is all good. But now we have to integrate that. You know, friendship, goodwill, reciprocity, all these terms we saw before. These are all ingredients of love, but they've got to be integrated into what it really, really is. The problem of integrating love. Halfway down the first paragraph on 114. Love is certainly a drama in the sense that it is made up of happenings and of action. To do, to act is the meaning of the Greek word drao, which means drama, from which drama comes. Thus, the dramatis personae discover the plot of this drama in themselves, perceive their love as a psychological situation unique of its kind, and one of great and absorbing importance in their inner lives. A person is, of course, among all the varied objects of the visible world, that unusual one, which is endowed with an inner self of its own and is capable of inner life. Psychology, which is, as its name indicates, the science of the soul, endeavors to lay bare the structure and the foundations of man in his inner life. Its investigations serve to confirm that the most significant characteristics of that inner life are the sense of truth and the sense of freedom. Okay, a little bit further down in 115. But awareness of truth and falsehood lies together outside the boundaries of that which matter can furnish. Truth is the condition of freedom. Or if a man can preserve his freedom in relation to the objects which thrust themselves on him in the course of his activity as good and desirable, it is only because he is capable of viewing these goods in the light of truth, and so adopting an independent attitude to them. Without this faculty, man will never be determined by them. These goods would take possession of him and determine totally the character of his actions and the whole direction of his activity. His ability to discover the truth gives man the possibility of self-determination, of deciding for himself the character and the direction of his own actions. And that is what freedom means. Okay, when in the beginning, in my church, at a wedding ceremony, at the beginning, the priest asks the couple, before the ceremony begins, they stand there in the church, either in the back or they can stand up front, and he asks them, have you come here freely to take so-and-so as your husband or so-and-so as your wife, according to the mind of the church? Freedom means is our choice one that has come from an integrated love? In other words, do we have all these parts, and are we choosing this freely, not out of compulsion or codependency or delusion from sensuality or idealism from sentimentality? And this is the stuff that enters into the annulment process. In other words, you have to be free. Part of what's required for a sacramental marriage, a true sacramental, is a degree of freedom of the couple. In other words, are you unencumbered by psycho-spiritual, physical things that would make your choice less free? Yes.
Have you ever denied anyone and said you're not ready yet? By the grace of God, any couple that I thought wasn't, in the process of the pre-Cana, the relationship disintegrated. So I didn't have By
to
the
say it.
facts, by the facts.
Yeah, by the facts. As you draw them into looking at things, it starts to.
It worked.
It worked, yeah.
It worked.
So far, I've never had to tell a couple, no, I don't think you should be married. I may have felt that, but they tended to disintegrate before. Praise God.
That's
you know.
it.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
why
it
Cana is so
works.
important.
It
So you can
is.
how else would they
But
find that out?
Yeah,
sometimes
it's true.
Cana is not done correctly, and that doesn't happen.
Right.
Because I've heard even from the words of a priest saying, "Oh, that poor couple," and I'm thinking, well,
What? Stop them.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
that's why I asked. So thank you. It's very good.
Yeah, the process helps it, because you bring all this stuff to light, and they've talked about none of it. You know, they're locked into the sensual, the sentiment, or whatever. And then when you start bringing this stuff up, my goodness, then they're going at it, you know, because they have all this disagreement and all this confusion, and then this strains the relationship. Then they decide, well, maybe we shouldn't get married.
And don't you think resistance to going to pre-Cana is a problem right there?
Yeah.
They don't want to talk
Yeah.
to each other. They
Yeah.
don't want to talk
They don't want
about
to go deeper.
issues.
Yeah.
Go deeper.
Okay, I do like as the church does basically, you require 6 months prior to marriage. I start meeting with the couple, minimum of 6 months. And I'll do it based on the couple, since I can meet with them myself. It depends on how often I meet, depending on the couple, what their needs are, and so on. And one of the things I do is we take what's called a pre-marriage inventory. It's like a communications exercise. In other words, they're given a list of questions, and they have to answer independently. In other words, they're not supposed to, connect on it. And then that gets scored, and I get the results back. And that's actually a little guide that helps, like, because it's questions that actually touch on these issues. Like they'll say, it'll say like, issues, all the different aspects of marriage, but a lot of it have to do with the relationship, communication, love, sexuality, children, all that kind of stuff. And that's where you begin to a lot of the, because the way it works is they're asked a question, and they have 3 choices to answer. They either agree with the question, disagree, or they're not sure. So they take it individually, and they mark their answer. Then when I get the results back, there's the preferred answer. In other words, the instrument wanted them both to answer this way. So it marks how much agreement did they have with the instrument, and how much agreement did they have with each other. So like I'll say, okay, it says here, it has questions on there like, we have discussed what could possibly end our marriage. So, and I said, you, John, agreed with that question. Susie, you disagreed. Now let's talk about it. And that's when it starts. That's when you start to it starts to expose everything. Good and bad. Things you have to look at, things that are good,
Can you use that model for couples that are in troubled marriages and have already been formed as a place to where they can go to look where their
Yeah.
differences are to work on?
Yes, yeah, you can. Mm-hmm.
What if people can't decide whether they should get married or not because they're not quite sure they're right for each other? You can't get into pre-Cana with that, can you? You have to be engaged. Is that it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. See, the problem is,
Pre-Cana.
yeah, I was going to say,
But see,
yes.
that's why we're here. We're already in
Yeah,
that
yes.
phase. We're learning what that means.
Yeah.
Pre-Cana really begins at conception. It does. It begins at
So
conception
we have
because
to we have to teach our children what you're saying. There's a cycle here.
yeah, well, from the time the child is in the womb, they say, of course, I believe that they sense, if they're wanted or whatever, there's a sense. Okay, they're created in love and they're going to be loved. They're already getting a message. See, pre-Cana is all about getting the right message and the right worldview. Pre-Cana needs to be, as you say, sister, pre-Cana. It has to be conception to marriage, because by the time they come to pre-Cana, their worldview has already been crystallized, and it's not according to the mind of the church. So now you have a few weeks or months or whatever, or they're pre-Cana program to what? Reconfigure their brains after they've been living this way for umpteen years and thinking this way. So we have to do something, but really it begins, real pre-Cana is taking the theology of the body and letting that be the prism, the paradigm by which we raise children. In other words, three things I recommend. If you want to take concepts from theology, a sense of gift, wonderment, and gratitude. Raise children with that worldview based on those three things. That's what the theology body is calling us to. Gift, a sense of gift. Life is a gift, making gift of self. People are gift. Seeing giftedness, living the spiritual gift. Wonderment, because that develops their mystical contemplative. And then gratitude. That if you live a life of gift and wonderment, you will live a life in which you will be primarily a person of gratitude. Now, if that child is raised with that worldview, they can walk easily into marriage then. Or much easier. Then they're prepared for marriage. Because marriage is simply the next stage of that for them. In other words, they're walking. It's not like there's, okay, here's your life, now you're going to get married, so we've got to put you in this program that's for married couples. No, it's just another stage in your walk of life, and especially the faith journey, of which you just sort of smoothly enter into, or sort of in sequence you're entering into. But you've already been living this, and marriage will now take her to another dimension. You understand? Because basically it's what I'm saying is this sacramental worldview. Marriage is a sacrament, and if we see it that way, know how to see sacramentally, because we were raised that way, then marriage will be you're much more prepared for it. Yes?
The tension that I find in the pre-Cana stage of life is that like the Holy Father says, that trying to achieve this integrity, and not just the sensuality and sentimentality, but also psychosocial, spiritual, all
Yes.
that integration,
Yes.
and achieve that self, and so you can be happy and whole
Right.
and healthy.
Exactly.
But it benefits from being in relationship with others,
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
in relationship to the opposite sex.
Yes, yes.
But how do you hold that intention that my own integrity is based on our integrity in
Yes.
relationship?
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, though, that if we only are becoming integrated ourselves by being in relationship, then you have the codependency.
Yeah.
Your ability to be more emotionally involved and my ability to be more sensibly involved ends up being codependent, but we can't be. We have to be integrated on our own.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So how do you walk that tension together, that we need our own integrity, but we benefit from being in a relationship? So
Right.
it's this constantly adjusting
Yes.
as you go.
Yeah. What it is, I think what you're talking about is in order to be in a relationship, in order to make a gift of self, which is what marriage is about, you have to possess yourself. You have to be integrated yourself, and at the same time learn integration and relationship. So yeah, the integration of yourself comes about by living really living the true Christian Catholic life, as it were. You're brought up on, you're taught what it is, you live by it, You put it in practice. You have the sense of wonderment through your life, of gift, of awareness of God, of the dignity of the human person. You know, you're given these values, so you're developing as individually. You're being integrated, and then you have to do that in relationship to one another. See, you bring to marriage. I call it, you're like a package deal. I call it a bag of tricks. You're a bag of tricks. You bring to marriage what you are and what you are not, each one of you. So you're in varying levels of integration or disintegration, and that's going to affect then how integrated or disintegrated are you going to relate then. And this is why it is so important that the best, that what we would like, the ideal, is for two truly practicing Catholics to enter into marriage.
Equally yoked.
Yeah, equally what?
Equally yoked.
Equally yoked. Yeah. That you because you're both coming with higher levels of integration individually, which is going to allow you to then to be more integrated in how you relate to one another. Like I had a couple that came to me recently, and he's a Catholic that is now reverted, been a revert now, he's trying to rediscovering, and she's a Buddhist. But they enter into marriage that way, and now it's like they have to start over again to redefine, because now he's aware of what marriage really is now. And he is getting into his faith, whereas now he's married to this girl who did not have his faith, is not going through this. Now what do we do? But he wants to be committed to the marriage. He said, well, the two of them do, but it's like, boy, that's because everything you say, every point he makes, which is right on target now with our spirituality, she does not share in that. That's not her perspective. Yes.
So it sounded to me like, you seem to be suggesting that it's very difficult to become personally integrated at the same time that you're in a relationship or this type of affectionate relationship, whereas maybe it should come first. It
Your
sounds
personal
like
integration.
You should be strong first
Yes.
in yourself before you
Yes.
start reaching out, looking for that.
Right.
type of,
Exactly. You can't go. Which is why,
relationship.
yes, and that touches on the whole re-looking at quote-unquote dating and when that should happen, what that should be, and because people are rushing into this relationship, at very young ages, and they're rushing into intimacy, and they themselves are not integrated. You can see the wisdom behind a lot of things in culture. Like a lot of cultures, into this day, women, the girls, never left home unless they were going to be married. In other words, you didn't live on your own apartment as a single girl. And there's still culture like that today. That's still kind of the way it is even in Italy. It was considered a little bit scandalous. Like, why is this girl who's not married living on her own? Okay, what is that based in? It's based, I think, in some of this point that you don't go into a relationship unless you yourself are integrated and you're ready and it's there. But you don't go out there to sort of experiment in it or throw yourself into it and make yourself vulnerable when you're not yourself integrated.
The point that the tension that I'm finding, though, is that by being in a relationship, it helps my integration. So by having friends that are going to challenge my disintegration, both male and female, I become more integrated. But then if it is someone that I'm attracted to, then I'm also the possibility of falling in love is there. So I'm growing in my own integrity,
right? Yeah.
And in spirituality, but I'm also then the possibility of having an even possibility of an even deeper relationship.
Yes.
And so, how do you enter into, how do you hold that self-integration in tension with the with the relationship.
You know something, what you bring up is a question for, and I think it's a question that is and certainly ought to be faced. Basically, he's saying that if you're growing, okay, you're growing in your own personal integration, but that's also influenced or helped by being in relationship with someone. That relationship helps you to integrate as well. But at the same time, there's a balance, there's a tension there of growing in your own individual integrity and growing in the integrity of a relationship. One helps the other, but one can also kind of.
Like friendship is at first sounds what I'm hearing is I'm hearing a friendship that is developing into something more.
Yes, that
If
kind of.
you're-
Which could have the
The
possibility.
in
Yeah.
all the relationships.
But that friendship is supporting your growth in your individual identity and discovering who you are before you get into an intimate relationship.
This is a question, yeah, and this is a question that is faced, ought to be faced, by people discerning religious life, like men preparing for the seminary or become sisters, and they either do come to grips with it or but think they certainly ought to. This balance of relationship, of being personally integrated, and doing it in the process of being in relationship. I think that's a real biggie, especially for priestly formation. And I think it's
If
where.
you've never had like male or female relationships
Yes.
as friends, then later on it's gonna like hit you,
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God, that's what I gave up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Yeah, and again
Can
the.
you repeat that part?
What the.
Like if you've never had male or female relationships.
Well, if you never had male-female relationships,
Yeah.
and then you come to the point where you suddenly do, and maybe you're a seminarian or you become a priest or religious life, and say, oh, gee, this is what it's like. I've come across it, and this is what it's like. Wow, I haven't dealt with this. I haven't been integrated. This part of me has not had the integration. And this, of course, is what's behind a whole lot of, when people leave religious life or even have a tough time, making that decision, whatever. This was happening, and this is what's happening when we lost so many vocations in the 60s, the 70s, because suddenly there was this sort of like, the kind of training up to that point had a lot to do with you avoid that. You're going to become a celibate, so you don't relate. Well, the 60s kind of opened things up there, and suddenly people were like getting into water without knowing how to swim. And formation didn't prepare them for that. And I don't know I think formation still has a long way to go in that regard as well. Which is why the theology of the body, exactly, has to be. In fact, I was asked at California to speak at the seminarians about this from the theology perspective, and I'll be speaking again in.
What diocese?
I spoke in Oakland. I'm going to be coming back there in August, and also in when is it? They asked me to address to speak at the vocation directors conference too on this issue, and it's one that I think is very, very critical. See, if we would have gone here, if formation would be more along these lines and dealt with this question, we would not have had the clergy sex abuse scandal. And again, what the wisdom of theology of the body, in religious life, your life is a spousal one. So you're going to have to learn how to live spousally. Meaning, that means relationship. You're going to have to learn how to deal with intimacy. Because your life, you are called to intimacy. You are called to a spousal relationship with God, your people. You're called to be brother and sister, but also spousal. Sister relates as spouse and as mother. That's why they call them mother superior and sister. And it's very real. And she couldn't do that unless, like I always say, the best celibates would make the best married people, and vice versa. Like you should be able to look at her and say, to me, the greatest compliment to her witness to who she is would come if someone were to say, boy, she would have been a great mother and wife. That is the most, to me, the greatest affirmation of the way she's living her celibate religious life. It shows that she's living it spousally.
And I really like what Mark said about, like, you have to make adjustments. Like, it doesn't come overnight. It's not like, okay, now I'm ordained or
Yeah.
I'm profession. I'm all set. I got
Right,
it all
yeah.
together. I did all the work. It's like, no.
No.
You know, you can have crises.
Oh,
stuff's
yeah.
gonna come up, but if you know what's up, if you know
Yes.
what the truth
Yeah,
is,
yes.
if you have these guidelines, the walls around the playground,
Yes.
you're going to know where to go with that and what to do with it, and so you can really grow. And
Right.
You don't take all these detours and
Yes.
wind up in confusion and
Yes, it's
maybe even go against what's really your vocation, because
yes.
you're going for, it's like nobody can live without relationships of whatever kind.
No.
And I think that's in the past what priesthood and religious life is like. No, close it down.
Yes.
You're a little worker of God.
Right.
You
And
don't
yet-
need any personal
And yet
anything, for yourself. And
Yes.
that goes against what the human being is.
It seems to me that the best way to grow in that area is to have a close relationship with God, because He will teach us
Right.
how to relate.
Mm-hmm.
It all comes from Him.
It
Everything
does.
comes from Him.
It does. And you teach what's called, you learn what's boundaries. Like, see what happened when the religious life, especially in the 60s, all of a sudden now they start experiencing relationship. So, oh my God, they were thrown into this quandary. Like, oh my God, I have these feelings. So we like as usual, we did the bipolar thing. Well, if I have these feelings, I got involved in this relationship, I have these feelings, well then I have to go that way. That's it. Either I have these feelings and I'm experiencing this, or I'm totally avoiding it so I don't have those feelings so I can stay in religious life. No. The approach should have been, and still should be, okay, you're going to have relationship, you're going to have, things may happen, feelings, sentiment, reaction, emotion, whatever. That's okay. Stay with it now. Stay with it. We'll negotiate through this and see what this really is, how to relate to it. This is, as you say, it's a learning, it's an integrating process. You didn't have to make it an either-or deal.
And
Yes.
in response to what you said, I think, so you grow in that integration with God, that relationship with God, but you do it in three ways. You do it with God, but you also do it with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
in your relationship with others. So by being in relationship with others, with yourself, and then with God, that ultimate relationship with God increases.
Yes.
I think it's a highlight thing, first with God.
Because, and when things go bad in your life, like you get divorced or whatever,
Mhm.
God is always moving. It's like that relationship will never, ever
No.
end. He's on 24/7, man. He is there for you.
At your
and-
table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He teaches us how to love.
Yes.
So
It's
I think
not
we
like-
start with humans and we try to apply whatever we're doing humanly to God. It's like
Yes.
it's what I think Mary Ann said. If we start with God in prayer and all that stuff, we'll feel affirmed too. We'll feel
Right.
loved, and we'll feel like okay,
Right.
that's how we get integrated. I think too.
Right.
We do our natural human level stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but the grace of God is what will really, in sacraments and everything, help us with our human work. Like grace builds on nature, so we need the two of them working together.
When there were the cases of people in just life running into this whole thing, and one of the things that was very commonly identified was there was usually some breakdown in their prayer life, which is what she's saying. In other words, it wasn't just where I'm this holy, perfect religious person, and all of a sudden I met this girl or this woman, and I don't know what to do with it, and I have to leave. It's something was already kind of breaking down there in terms of that intimacy with God, so that when you came across that, then you weren't as able to deal with it in an integrated way. And in fact, there was that breakdown with. There was a breakdown in prayer that happened.
The breakdown in everything.
Yeah, and everything. Yeah. Thank you. See you next month. We'll continue on, and it's just going to keep getting better and better. Because there was that confusion and that stuff that happened in the 60s. People stopped praying. They stopped praying in the way that they normally did, or things became seen as passé. Or so that's why you're reviving a lot of it now. The Eucharistic adoration. A lot of these things are benediction, all that. Those things were during that time. Oh, we don't do that. Silly. So we actually began to have a breakdown in the prayer life, which then made so many people vulnerable to when they encounter these relationships. They realized that they weren't personally integrated, and they didn't know how to relate in a way that was integrating. It was either or. And I think still that a lot of work needs to be done in this area with in formation. Certainly in priestly formation. I don't know if the same religious life as much, but certainly in priestly formation. I don't think they're still quite getting it. See, this is the real safe environment. This is how we'll be more, quote unquote, safe. It's not in these external things, of avoiding and watch this and watch that. That's the kind of thing that produced this, It's in learning how to be truly integrated.
I think that's partly why some priests want to allow married priests maybe.
Right. Yes.
Understand either that's possible.
Exactly. Right. They're saying it as either or. If I'm not married, I can't be integrated. I can't handle. I'll never be totally. I cannot love. I cannot live spousally. I cannot. Yes. For every choice you make, there's also a no to something else. But it's not a no. You make a choice for celibacy. It's not a no to intimacy. To love, to relationship. In fact, it's the opposite. It's an incredibly courageous and perilous choice for the greatest intimacy and fruitfulness, but in a mystical way.
The greatest love story ever told is Christ's sacrifice on the cross.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have to go to the foot of the cross in your relationships.
Mm-hmm. You know what the sum total of my training was for this stuff when I was in seminary? Spiritual director gave a talk one day and said, "Remember, boys, keep the cork on the bottle and the zipper zipped up." That was it. And they sent us out. And I think back, as a priest, why weren't we this is central, this is what it's all about. Now we know spiritual theology body, spousal mystery about everything. It's the fundamental element of everything comes in there. Why was this untouched? Untouched. Well, because our professors didn't have it themselves. They weren't taught themselves. They weren't integrated. It was mostly that just, you avoid those things and that's it. And be good boys and that's it. Now we have theology of body, so now it really behooves us to integrate this into formation, religious life. Then you'll see an increase in vocations, which you're already seeing here and there, and there'll be much stronger and lively and vivid ones and vital ones. And once we realize that this is just another choice to live and grow in an integrated way and to live and love spousally. Yes, there are things to avoid and be careful of, and there's always a choice against something when you choose for something. But the basic thrust of it is what is positive, what is life-giving, not just what is denied, what needs to be avoided.
I was on cable TV on Monday, and
Oh.
the host was this elderly guy, and he was he loves nuns and everything, but he was like, any regrets? And it was like, my life is a life of regrets.
Yeah,
And
regrets.
it was like, but you're used to that, especially from that generation, because they saw a lot of priests and
Yeah.
sisters who were very unhappy in their vocations and maybe didn't have vocations really.
Yeah.
So, so the younger guy with me, he was like very upset that he had put it in that context. Like, no, that's just standard. We get
Yeah,
that
it's
all
standard,
the time.
yeah.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
Any
Regrets, yeah, you gotta have some regret,
So, Father, the answer to how do you integrate? Is it the God, self, and others? And how do you answer that question? How do you integrate?
Well, you know what? You integrate by living it. And yes, there are risks. It's a journey. But you get all the helps you can. You stay close to the church. You have the sacraments. Spiritual directors, prayer, knowing what's right. You just take all those things. Those are all things for our journey, and you just go, and you embrace life and embrace the journey, and you'll experience things. You'll make some mistakes. You'll fall and get back up, and there's no other way to do it but to do it.
But see, you're also saying there too, is how you base your decisions. It's not on your feelings. You're basing your decisions on what you know and what you learn. So you look for the good things that's going to teach you.
Right.
And the good people that can help direct you. So when you're placed in a movie or in front of other people that are controversial, leading you away from what you know the truth is, you can make a decision and you're not going to go because they're forcing you to your feelings. So you're
Right.
supporting yourself, supporting yourself with people.
Right. Right. So don't be afraid to live and to love, and we go on this journey equipped, but we should not be afraid. Embrace it. You will learn. You might make mistakes, take some hits, but I really think that if God is sending us a message in one word, I think He's shouting at us, live, just live, all right?
Live and seek the truth.
So live and seek the truth, yeah, just go on that journey. Yeah, it's perilous, you'll get some bumps and all that, but live and love. Better to live and love than to not have.
Does live and love mean go ahead and marry the Buddhist, even though it has to be redefined? No.
No, because then the question of, they weren't really living and loving, perhaps at the time.
You chose on the feelings, not the
Yeah.
truth.
They weren't living and loving. Thank you, very good.
So you didn't have an informed conscience.
Yes, and they were, and the guy, by the way, the guy in this situation was, he was classic. He said, I was the classic cafeteria Catholic. That's all right. Are you still
They're
on?
still, they're still.
Oh, okay. We're,
27 people online.
oh, okay. The case of this one guy, he said it was, it was your classic cafeteria Catholic, and so it did nothing for him. It was, very rudimentary, go to mass, but there was no knowing of the real why, and that's why he's had now the reversion, and he's gone through a lot of stuff that, but he wants this marriage to work, but they said, Father, we have to start over. I says, yeah, you do. After X amount of years of marriage, quote unquote marriage, you now are going to start to be married for the first time. Now starts your pre-Cana, the real pre-Cana. And basically it's backtrack. It's trying to go back to discover what you should have learned one time you were born. How to love, how to wonder, pray, relate. Now we have to learn that now as adults, and she comes from a different perspective. It's not that obviously there are certain commonalities with all religions, as it were. There's the universal truths of human beings, kindness and all that. But what we mean by those things, that's the difference. In other words, what is happiness to a Buddhist and what is the goal of life for a Buddhist is quite different than for a Christian. Very different. And of course, your ultimate worldview affects everything. He's going to love his spouse out of now his rediscovered sort of theology of the body perspective. she can't do that. She doesn't know that. How is she going to be able to love him now? That's what we have to work with, you know. So we'll see how it goes. But and then I'll ask them too. I'll ask so many couples, why did you get married? Tell me. What? I mean, this is a huge leap. You must have had something strong. I'm amazed at how many couples really can't say it. Really can't identify it. Or it's just like, well, he seemed like a nice guy. That's all they'll say. To be honest with you, really, it's amazing.
Which just shows how organic marriage is,
Yeah,
too. You know?
yeah. It's always just a nice guy. And then the rest was, you know, having sexual relations, so they felt close. So they didn't have to make, in a sense, they didn't have to make a decision. It was just like, well, we already are close, you know. So I guess we'll just call it marriage now. Call it sliding into marriage. You know, they live together and all that. So they're kind of sliding into marriage. So the sense of like the real choice, the real leap, based upon these very mature and integrated things, wasn't there.
You know, the King's Speech, I don't know if anyone's seen King's Speech, really good. It just,
You did see it up there, huh?
yeah, oh, it's really good. It's like, you see what persons really are, you know, like these people had rich inner lives. Not
Yeah.
just because they were royals, but just, I think, the times.
Yes.
And the whole thing about marriage in there is incredible because that, you know, Wallace Simpson, who eventually, he abdicated, the king, and so the king's guy who has to make the Duke of York had to take his brother's place in the line of succession. And, but it was all about like this, what this brother was doing with this twice divorced woman was this horror, this like, not just from a political standpoint, but like morally.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, and they don't pull any punches in the movie about it.
Uh-huh.
You know, it's kind of like, this is not the way to live. This
Yes.
is not good.
Yeah.
This is not a good thing, a value, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
What? Yeah, you know, it's how... I had a kind of lawyer friend of mine said one time, he says, well, he says, you know, we could probably rubber stamp annulments for 90% of marriages that take place. And what he meant by that was because they don't come to marriage with this truly Catholic sacrament understanding. And that's, of course, the whole basis of annulment, you know, that this was not sacramental. Well, how many really are when in our culture, in our world today? Because all this stuff we're talking about, they know none of it there. Zero, zilch. And I mean, it's in their heart. You know, it's in the human heart. You just have to, but nothing's gotten in there and touched that in them. They didn't get the message, you know.
And you wonder, can you turn it around? Is annulment,
Yeah.
well, usually you're already divorced or separated at
Yeah.
that point, but can they turn it around?
Yeah, can
You know,
they turn
they're already
around?
together, they do love each other in
Yeah.
some form, so.
I'm usually pretty optimistic about it, pretty positive. I insist on it. Yes, you know, you can turn around, you must turn around. You can't, let's do everything. You know, it's like in our culture, we say you're innocent until proven guilty. It's like this marriage is, presumed marriage must be protected. It's like the incumbent, you know.
Yeah.
It's the incumbent, so you go in favor of that. Unless it can really, really be proven that this cannot be, it's just going to break down, they're going to get divorced, you know. And you really, and I think most all of them can be. If we could just get to them at the right time, you
I
know.
think a lot of people are living in false peace, so they're walking around trying to
Yeah.
avoid conflict because they've not been taught how to deal with conflict
Right.
and how to properly do it without accusing and screaming and yelling and condemning the other person. So we're
Yeah.
not taught how to properly have that conflict resolved.
There's a very good book. You know, are you familiar with Gregory and Lisa Popchak? They do a lot of work in this, how to identify these stages of marriage that are like this, and how to get ultimately to the. And their book is called "For Better Forever."
They're on WTN too.
Yeah, they're on WTN, Ave Maria Radio, and their book is very good in that. It talks about exactly that thing, and ultimately where you want to go into marriage, which is that intimacy. But it takes you through, almost like John Paul, it takes you this in stages. So there's this type of marriage. They believe that every marriage goes through this journey, these stages, that it's natural to do that. and that ultimately you want to come to this final stage of a real marriage, a real intimacy and love. And I think exactly what they call that. But it's a good book. You might even have it here in the Popchak's book, yeah. For Better Forever.
I was recently exposed to a couple that having some marriage issues, and just something real simple as when you know, go ask, you ask a question to them together, and then you let them separate and expound on it on their own
Mm-hmm.
form, and you bring them back together in a supposedly safe environment where they can discuss what each individual's feeling is without judgment.
Right.
And something as simple as what is admired about the other person. And one person said his ability to focus and to read. Well, that just sent him in a livid terror because you picked that out about me. And that was an area where his wife could not get focused. She had so much unsettlement within her body that she couldn't, things she couldn't express, that she admired that he could read, where she is trying to find answers and reading 5 books at one
Yeah.
time. He could read one book and just totally escape, while she's trying to find answers and keep the house going. And she could admire that, where he could just tune it all out because it wasn't his responsibility. And for her to pick that out of him, he just couldn't believe, out of all the qualities that he had, how could she pick that silly little thing, you know?
Yeah, now see, in that situation, what I would do is I would take, okay, let's look at that thing that you think is silly, and let's see the ramifications of it. You know, what does this really mean in other areas that she might admire you, or the areas that is a real gift?
Right.
You know, it's never just the thing itself, that ability to focus may be good in all kinds of other ways.
It finally got to where she could express that, but it took a while to get there because she was so hurt. And again, it was just to show where the breakdown of communication is,
Right.
that he shut her down without saying, well, what exactly do you mean about that?
Yeah.
There was just too much assumption going on.
Like I always tell the couple,
They
it's
couldn't
not,
go deep. They wouldn't go deep on their own.
it's not what the person says, it's the message they're delivering. Try to pick up on the message. Like that, in that case, I'm just thinking theoretically since you brought it up, that could be a case where the message she's sending him could be one of the most essential messages for the man. In other words, I'm going to expand on that issue. I would see it this, that what she's really saying, what she's really admiring, is not the fact that he can look at a book, but she's actually saying he has ability to, in fact, lead, to see the way, to see things clearly, to come to solutions and decisions effectively, objectively. And I like that, and she should, because that's how the man is supposed to serve the woman. So in that little case, what might be underneath it, and if you dig around on it, you might find out that that's really what she's saying to him, which would now becomes a very fundamental and profound affirmation.
But she was actually in her own way because she had not been able to express anything, or she has in the past, but it was shut down. She was saying, help me be like that. I would
Right.
like to find that. You look peaceful. How can I get there? You
Mhm.
couldn't see that, and she couldn't express it
Right.
in those definite terms.
Right. It's always the message, not the words. And we're always sending messages, even when we're not talking. Try to discern the message. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting in the book that I think he defines psychology as the study of the soul.
Soul, yeah.
I thought that was fascinating because how many psychologists actually know anything about the soul?
Right. See
It
that.
was the mind.
Yeah, they think it's the mind, but it's the soul. It's interesting because we're another way to look at a human person is we are body, soul, and spirit. Not just body and soul, body, soul, and spirit. The soul, in fact, the word for psychology, psyche, means like soul. It means almost like the, yes, the thinking, sensing, living part of the person. But that soul, that part of it, has to be animated or filled with the spirit. The presence of God in us is a part of us. And so it's interesting that John Paul goes in there, like you said, he's superseding psychology. Psychology is limiting itself. He's talking about the mind and all that. Well, the soul is, the psychology really is the study of the soul of the person. In other words, your senses and your mind together. Your basic experience as a person. And And so when you go into, when you work with people from that kind of a definition of psychology, then again, you're much more effective. You're much more comprehensive and integrated, rather than just, oh, it's just on the mind. That's, again, going back to the movie, Rights, he kept saying, to the priest, oh, just take her to a psychologist, take her to a psychiatrist, it's, no, it's so limiting.
But what he had.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it has a value, but it's limited.
Or they say, just take a pill. Cure it.
Yeah, just take a pill, yeah. All right, well, we'll pick it up next month again, huh? Great.
You can watch the past classes. Go on your website.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Is there a schedule of readings or something we should be doing?
Oh, okay, yes. What I want you to do is